Texas Longhorns, #1 in the country, and looked great to start the season. Did not look good in the first 2 quarters of last night's game against the Georgia Bulldogs, and they suffer their first loss of the year. Corey Mose from KView back with us now. Nick Angstad will hang around as well. Gentlemen, I imagine you watched the game. Corey, I know you watched the game. Nick, I imagine you did last night too, because who wasn't watching that football game? Corey, for you down in Austin, what is the reaction down there on the 40 acres to certainly a lackluster first half and ultimately the first loss of the year for UT?
Yeah, it's basically disappointment, right? You spoke about how the first half went bad offensively, but if you've been to these games and covering Texas like I have, like you noticed this has been a trend for the Longhorns over the past couple of weeks. Dating back to even last week against Oklahoma, they had 3 straight 3-and-outs, and the offense just didn't look good. Now, in that game against OU, the defense stood tall, and they didn't give up any points when they turned the ball over in a horrible field position. But you can't do that against the #5 team in the country, right? Georgia's going to take advantage of those opportunities. And so that's been the biggest knock on Sarkisian right now, is that this offense that you're supposed to be this offensive guru under the Nick Saban tree hasn't been rolling to get the game started. And then you're looking at catch up. And when you play catch up against Georgia, you see what happens. You won't catch up, and you take your first L of the season.
It could have been much worse, too. 2 first-half interceptions thrown by Georgia. They couldn't seem to capitalize with touchdowns. It was a lot of field goals. Kirby Smart was very nearly regretting that heavily. Talked about it at halftime that was a problem. Nick, from more of a fan perspective, watching the game just from afar and just enjoying the football game, what did you think of last night and how that game transpired?
Yeah, can we talk about the fans throwing stuff all over the field and Sark having to go run over there and tell them to stop? I mean, that's the thing that I'm taking away from this game. I know it was a big loss for Texas, and they're back on top, and we're all excited about on the field. But the fans became part of the story, which I think it doesn't happen very often in sports, and I think that was an insane thing that happened in this game.
Yeah, $250,000 fine from the SEC today.
100%. But I think more so because we've seen beer cans getting thrown on the field before. Like this is. It's terrible when it happens, but this is nothing new. The questionable issue came when it all of a sudden stopped the game enough for the refs to have another conversation to overturn what was a terrible call. So, Corey, I'm curious because watching your Twitter feed, I think you were just as confused as we were watching at home. How did you take that entire environment into effect, and what was your main takeaway from the refs ultimately rewarding bad fan behavior in a way?
You have no idea. Everyone was just confused in the press box. There's no way they just took this moment of all the beer cans getting thrown on the field to reconvene and talk about it. It's you just reconvene to make the call. So how are you going to talk about you're going to reconvene again and change the call? So I've never seen that before in my life. And you spoke about we've seen beer cans thrown on the field all the time. But I would say you don't see that at Texas. And that's what a lot of people have been complaining about here. I was going down the elevator after that occurrence, and one UT alum, he was like, you know what? I've been going to games for 50 years, and I've never seen this happen before at UT. And so they kind of take of it as a disappointment to all the student sections that did that, because they want to take honor and pride in who UT is. And they're like, they're not Texas Tech. That's what a lot of people like to say. You're not in Lubbock anymore. And so they show a lot of remnants. I know, straight. It's a straight shot. But that's the whole sentiment around Texas right now. It's that's not who we're supposed to represent. And also, that's not how they represent on the field either, with the way they looked in that first half.
Lubbock, Texas on line 2 upstairs in the newsroom right now. I got some people frustrated. We went back and looked at it on the TV copy between the moment that the pass interference call was announced and the moment that the official came back and said, after further discussion, 4 minutes and 10 seconds went by. There are touchdown drives that happen in less time, less real time, than it took for them to reconvene and change that call. That was unheard of. And the SEC weighed in today and said that all rules were followed. How?
So my question in this is, what kind of can of worms does this open up? I think a lot of us have kind of accepted the sky judge, and to a certain extent it's in the NBA too. Well, they just kind of come in and either change a call real quick or ensure something is enforced the right way. This is different. This was a judgment call that was overturned in what was already a tough situation, but ultimately changed the course of the second half and made things far more interesting. Where do we go from here? Because at what point do we stop and say, hey, we can't do this for every game, because if we're switching on multi-view, you're not going to have someone on watching every specific game to make sure all of this is handled appropriately. Corey, what do you think?
Well, that's a good point. And it all went back to they made the right call technically. Like if you look at the replay,
that is true.
It's that it was clearly not a pass interference. It arguably could have been an offensive PI, but instead they changed it to just no call in general. And like you mentioned, the big change of events, because with that interception, then UT had a chance to get within one score compared to maybe Georgia going up 3 scores. And honestly, the comeback was over after that. And so I think it was a pivotal call and it needs to be made right, but not in that banner. And I think that's where you open the can of worms of, okay, every other student section around the country saw that. And so it's like, bet, if we don't like a call, we'll see if we can get them to sway it another way. And so that who knows what goes from here, and it's very dangerous at this point.
I was just a little confused by, like, Nick, could you imagine Joey Crawford getting someone buzzed down in his ear and saying, you got the call wrong, let's switch it during a timeout? Like,
yeah, it happens all the time in the NBA. They change 3s to 2s. They called a shot for the Mavs, I think in the playoffs last year, off because they looked back and saw that a guy was standing out of bounds. So this happens a lot. They have that whole room in Secaucus where they look at all these they look at all the plays that are happening, and they call down with judgment calls, especially if it's going to affect the end of the score. And so, yeah, I mean, they do this in other sports. As long as the call was made right, like maybe the refs needed some more time. That was such a high leverage situation. They just needed the 4 minutes, Mike, to just like calm down and be like, you know what, guys? I think we need to go look at that. And they got it right. So that's all it needs.
That is what ultimately matters. That does open up a giant can of worms, though, that now student sections across the country are going to go, hey, let's buy the refs time to get the call right and just throw a bunch of stuff on the field. That is...
Don't call it home court advantage for nothing.